If you've spent time in the world of multi-input video switchers, you might know that there is a feature that is by far the most requested feature across all of these, and that is for them to be 4K capable. 4K capable. Now, I've said in other videos that if I had the option for a 4K switcher, I would definitely take that option, but there are just technical and practical limitations as to why it's not super common, at least yet. 4K video is not just a little bit more complex than 1080, it's like exponentially more complex when it comes to the amount of data being transferred, bandwidth, processing capabilities, graphics capabilities. It basically means that these things have to have a lot more power inside of them, have to be a lot more reliable so they don't overheat and crazy stuff doesn't happen, and also then still relatively affordable. And so if you look at the world of switchers and you try to find 4K switchers, what you see a lot of right now are companies that make switchers that take 4K inputs, but then it still downscales it to a 1080 workflow. But sometimes they'll call those a 4K switcher, even though you're not actually getting a 4K signal from it. So that's kind of a whole thing. If you find actual 4K switchers, you find that they're usually pretty expensive. I have found about $5,000 to be the point where you're getting an actual reliable multi-input 4K switcher. But the thing with those is that they tend to just be switchers, maybe some picture-in-picture, maybe some basic like keying or something like that. The key to this workflow, though, is the YoloBox Extreme, because it makes it extremely easy to mix multiple 4K inputs. So everything you're seeing, not only in this video, but in a lot of our recent videos, has been recorded directly into the YoloBox Extreme from my camera's 4K signal into here, being recorded in 4K and then edited and stuff. So I kind of want to cover that workflow. I don't want to go through every feature of the YoloBox Extreme because there are a lot of them. So I do have a separate review on the YoloBox Ultra, which is a 4-input 1080 switcher, but the graphics capabilities, the overlays, the auto switching, all the kind of cool stuff that these can do, which are very, very powerful. They're not just switchers, they full-on production suites. Everything this can do, the YoloBox Extreme can also do, and more. So I'll kind of point you to this review if you want to know more about what a YoloBox can do. For now, I want to focus on the 4K workflow. The YoloBox Extreme, I guess I should have probably explained this earlier, is an 8-input switcher. So instead of 4, you have 8 inputs, and 5 of those are 4K capable. And the price of this, the MSRP, is $2,000. So it is significantly more expensive than like a $300 ATEM Mini, but the ATEM Extreme, which has 8 inputs, is like $1,200, maybe even a little more than that, around that. So for $800 more, you're getting not only the 4K capabilities, 5 4K input capabilities, but also then the built-in display and the graphics and everything else the YoloBox can do, which is pretty intense. You don't need a computer or anything else. If you don't want to use one, you can just stream and record everything directly here. And when I am recording, I do a few different options. I'm recording to an external SSD right now, just because that's kind of the easiest way for me to just unplug that and then plug it in my computer and edit. So that's the fastest workflow. Could also record to an internal SD card. I just don't have an extra high-speed card, so I'm not doing that. Or you can record internally to the 200 gigabytes of built-in internal storage. And before going too much further into this, I do want to let you know that YoloBox did send this with no obligation. They actually sent it to my wife, Heather, and for her to check out. But she has worked to kind of lock her setup in, and she doesn't do a ton of multicam stuff. So that was about 5 or 6 months ago, and then I kind of commandeered or commandeered the Extreme because it fit in extremely well to my workflow, but neither of us are under any obligation to say anything, make a video, do anything. They basically just sent it for feedback, and then it found a place in my workflow, which I am really excited about. And so for me, the reason that this is kind of a game changer is that about half the videos I make are like this. They're like explainer style videos where I'm sitting here and I'm explaining something or showing something, and I kind of usually have 1 or 2 cameras to talk into and then another 1 or 2 cameras to sort of show the, the thing. And typically what I'll end up doing for those videos is then recording internally on all my cameras, then take that footage, put it into Final Cut Pro, sync it all up, and edit from there. That takes a lot of time. And my raw footage for videos, a typical video is usually something like, I would say 40 to 60 plus minutes. And so that means each camera's outputting, 40-ish gigabytes at least of footage. And working with all, it's just kind of a hassle, especially for what ends up being a relatively simple video because it's just an explainer video. I do other videos where it makes more sense to, move the cameras, record internally, do different frame rates like 4K 120, get all kinds of B-roll shots, and those are a lot more production intensive, and it still to me makes sense to record internally for those because it's actually kind of easier that way. But for a lot of the stuff I do, being able to just have all of my cameras go into a switcher like this, and then when I'm done, I just have one file that has everything in it, and I can just chop it up and edit it. I cannot tell you like how much time it saves in this workflow. And so my main camera, like always, is the Sony FX3. That's this camera here with a 24mm f1.4 lens. All the cameras are set to 4K 24. I like 24 frames per second. I've been playing around at 30 a little bit lately, which is fun. And then the YoloBox lets you choose different 30, 50, 60. You can do all kinds of different stuff. The second camera I'm using is my Sony a7S III. You can see kind of right here past the FX3, and that's this camera with a 50mm lens. And this is also the camera that's running my audio. So the YoloBox does let you connect 3.5mm audio or USB audio. So I could even connect like a full-on Rodecaster into this. But I can also bring in audio from any of my HDMI sources. I have the DJI Mic Mini right here, and then I have the Sony Hot Shoe on the camera. I guess you can't see it on there, but on top of the camera is the Sony Hot Shoe, so that way I can run this mic without needing any cables, and it adjusts the gain levels automatically. And then I can bring in the HDMI audio source into the YoloBox. And the reason I'm doing that instead of my normal boom mic, which is the Sennheiser MKH50, is because I do have different cameras, so I'm going to be turning off axis from the mic, and that sounds a little strange sometimes with the boom mic, whereas when the mic's connected to me, then it sounds the same no matter what direction I'm facing. And I did want to actually mix and match different cameras just to kind of show the different 4K capabilities. So the next camera I'm using is the YoloCam S7, which is basically a micro 4/3 webcam. So it can output USB or HDMI. There are no physical controls on this camera, so everything has to be adjusted either with the YoloBox or with a desktop application to adjust things like color and all that. But this is a pretty sweet camera. It kind of deserves its own separate video, and I have a 25mm lens on there. So this is a legit mirrorless webcam, interchangeable lens webcam, which is pretty cool. And then I do have an overhead camera, which is my Sony ZV-1F. That's just a really nice, compact, lightweight camera that just works great for overhead stuff. And that's to get this shot here, which is the top-down shot of the YoloBox Extreme. So you can see all of my inputs. These are my 5 4K inputs. And then I have one other thing happening here, which is actually the YoloBox's HDMI output going in to one of the 1080 inputs. And that's so I can actually show you what I'm seeing on the YoloBox. So when I go into the recording options, I can kind of show you exactly what I'm doing here. Like I mentioned, you can do USB, internal memory, or SD, and then you can also adjust your frame rate. So I have 4K 24 set, and then you can also choose your sources. Right now I'm just doing program because that's the simplest workflow for me, but if you wanted to do isolated recording, I could record all the different inputs as well. I like the program because I'm just kind of relying on it right now. I'm not even recording internally on my cameras or anything as a backup, so I'm putting a lot of faith into the YoloBox right now. But the reason I like this is because then it just gives me that one file, and that's what I chop up and edit. So for the kind of workflow I'm doing right now, that's what helps it be really, really fast. But if you do need to record isolated tracks or you want backups or whatever, you can do that as well. And then you can also set a recording limit. So right now I have it set to 30 minutes. That's not how long it will record, but it's how long it will break the files into. So for 30 minutes, that means it's going to, every 30 minutes, create a new file. And that's just kind of a way to protect yourself in case something goes wrong. If you have it set to never do that, or to do it, in a long period of time, and then something goes wrong at the very end and the file becomes corrupted, you kind of lose everything. Versus if you're breaking it down into smaller chunks, then you can just sort of put those chunks there. And so I have 30 minutes, which works pretty well. You can set it continuously if this is not something you want to deal with. I have noticed when I put those clips in the timeline, there is like 1 or 2 frames of black at the start of each clip. So I just have to kind of trim out those 1 or 2 frames, and then everything flows smoothly and the audio stays in sync and everything looks great. And then again, for my audio, you can kind of see here, every source has audio options, but I only have HDMI 5 on, which is my a7S III. You can even see HDMI 4, that's the FX3, has a decent signal as well, because that's a Sennheiser mic, but I'm not using that. So I only have the the audio turned on the input that I want. And then when you start recording, there's a little record thing up here, kind of above the program option. I'm trying to point to it. It's right here. You can sort of see there. And that is what I press to start recording and stop recording. I'm being very careful not to touch it. And you can also see if you look over here, with all of these inputs and all this audio, I'm using 49% of the CPU's power. So now down to 45%. So I'm only using about half of the CPU's power here. And that goes into the next part of the workflow, which is something, it's kind of the one bit of friction that I still have, and that is matching color. So on my FX3 and on my A7S III, these match very well. They're the exact same image sensor, different camera bodies, but it's super easy to match these cameras. I forgot to mention the other camera I was using is the OBSBot Tail 2, and that's how I was like doing the PTZ controls to show all the other cameras. I'm using the remote here, but you can control the OBSBot directly with the YoloBox as well. I have a separate video on exactly how to do that. It is really cool. Sort of talked about the Tail 2. I really like this camera a lot, but the colors are a little tough to match with my Sony currently because the OBSBot software doesn't give me a tint option. This looks a little more magenta to me than this does. So if I could take this and nudge it over to the green, I think it would then match a lot better. And then the YoloCam S7, I also think is a little more magenta. If I could push that to green, it would match the Sony's a little bit more, I think. I'm not sure what kind of sensor this has inside, but I don't believe it's I think it might be even a Lumix or Panasonic sensor. It's not a Sony sensor. The overhead camera, since this is a Sony sensor, it does match. If you kind of look at the skin tone, it matches a little bit better, but this is a different camera and a different sensor. So the thing that I cannot do is go in here and adjust colors independently on the inputs. And honestly, like, that's just not a thing most video switchers can do. But with all of the power, with all of the capabilities in the YoloBox Extreme, that would be something awesome if it's something that could be added in a future update. At least the ability to adjust tint and sort of like some basic brightness and, you know, saturation controls. Because if I can make all of these match, you know, near perfectly, then that would just streamline the editing process. I would still want to put on a preset to just, you know, bump up the colors and the saturation like stylistically for what I like. But in terms of like correctness, that would make things pretty easy. Right now, that's not something that's possible, but I can do some like different things here. So for example, on the overhead camera, I can bring up a menu to crop and rotate it. So by default, this is actually a very wide shot and it's flipped the other direction. So I was able to crop in and then rotate it so that way the overhead shot kind of looks like a nice typical overhead shot. And when it comes to that color issue, fortunately, the type of stuff that I do with this workflow and the type of videos I make here, total perfect color matching, accuracy is really not that important. It's more important to be able to see the stuff and to show it than to have it be exactly right, although it is really nice when it's exactly right. So sometimes I just kind of leave it and they just don't match. Other times what I will do is when I put the clip into Final Cut, I will go through and then do a rough cut. And I will then kind of have my different shots. So for example, when I'm using the Tail 2 and I know that this doesn't match perfectly as is, I can then add a preset to it that I made and then it will match a little bit better. And then so anytime that I see the Tail 2 pop up in the timeline, I just drag that preset to it and then it works. So that's kind of my workaround. It's not ideal, but it is still way faster than recording internally on all these different cameras and having to process all that footage and deal with, you know, project files that become 800 or 900 gigabytes by the time they're done. It's still a lot easier, but being able to adjust color for each individual input on here is something that would be incredibly helpful. If that's possible, not sure if it is, but I'm just sort of putting my request out there if it is. And as I'm recording here, I'm not trying to be perfect and do this all in one take, even though I am recording to the YoloBox. What I'm trying to do is sort of keep the edit in mind, but if I like, you know, flub up my line, I can just restart knowing that I cut that out. The thing that I really like doing with multiple cameras, especially for explainer videos, is avoiding jump cuts as much as possible. It's just a personal preference. So that means I might deliver a line here and explain something on this camera. And then when it's time to talk about the next thing, I can switch over to this camera. Or if I make a mistake, I'm talking on this camera and then I stumble over my words halfway through. Instead of restarting here, where it could potentially result in a jump cut, I can switch over to this camera and finish the line here. Now, sometimes I do still crop in during editing still to emphasize a point, or if I kind of made a mistake and there would be a jump cut, cropping in lets me avoid the jump cut. But having different cameras helps me avoid the jump cut. And even when I'm just sitting here talking, it lets things be more dynamic and more interesting because there's different camera angles, different shots that I can incorporate without having to do full on, you know, day or two of B-roll production and stuff like that. And so my workflow when I'm finished recording is to basically just import the footage into Final Cut. I usually then do detach the audio and adjust that if I want to, you know, process it or sweeten it up a little bit. And then I go through and I just kind of rough cut the clip together, and then I polish it up and fine tune it. And if I need to add B-roll, then I'll do that as well, but that's usually not something that I try to do much of with this workflow, because the whole point of this workflow is speed and efficiency and very little friction. So like right now I added in the clips of me editing in Final Cut Pro. That was like B-roll that I wanted to add in. But in other videos, I will, you know, I will spend a whole day filming product B-roll and getting all these different shots and all this really detailed stuff. This workflow is when I'm making videos that don't require that, and I just want things to be smooth and streamlined as possible to keep me as sane as possible. And overall, I've been really happy with the recording quality of the YoloBox, and I've been using it on quite a few videos and nobody has said anything. So that tells me that it's obviously looking pretty much the same as my regular cameras. I do think, let's go over here to the FX3. This is the YoloBox recording. That's everything you've seen so far in this video. And now this is the FX3's internal recording. I did start recording on the camera so we could do a comparison here. So this is the FX3's internal recording, and this is the YoloBox's recording. So the difference, maybe I could even do like, maybe I could get fancy and do a side-by-side where one half of the screen is internal recording and the other half of the screen is the YoloBox's recording. I do think that if you want to get into pixel peeping and you're somebody who wants the absolute maximum image quality possible, no matter how incremental those improvements are, the internal recording on the cameras is still better than the YoloBox. And that kind of makes sense. Like, they are cameras. They should record internally really well. But the YoloBox's internal recording, which is what we switch back to over here, is pretty darn hard, if not impossible, to tell the difference unless you are that, you know, magnifying glass pixel peeper person. I don't know, it's like 98% there. And again, for me, the benefit of the way improved workflow outweighs, you know, incremental improvements in image quality I might get by recording internally. And even that, I'm not 100% sure like what the difference is. The YoloBox's internal recording is really, really good and impressive. And you can also then output 4K as well if you wanted to use USB to run this into a computer for a live stream, or to even then record into a computer for whatever reason as a backup or something. So again, there's so much more that the YoloBox Extreme can do, and the YoloBox Ultra as well if you just need the 4-input 1080 workflow. These are full-on production suites. They're very, very impressive. But for now, I wanted to focus specifically on the 4K workflow because that has been the most requested feature of switchers for several years now. It is something that has been incredibly helpful for me. And the YoloBox Extreme, even with its higher price than most switchers at $2,000, is still the most practical and in a lot of ways, really the only option if you want multi-input 4K and you get 5 inputs, which is pretty sweet. If you do want to know more about what the YoloBox can do, check out my YoloBox Ultra review, which is ultra cool. It's extremely ultra cool.